everyone. I hope everyone is doing good, staying dry, and the weather is not a nuisance anywhere as much. Um, so, Today I have a very interesting guest, Elle. Her name is Elle, and we met through Cohere's Community Champions program. And Elle is basically someone, a very passionate data scientist and AI enthusiast I have ever met, and that's why I wanted to bring in her on my podcast today to talk about what she does, what she has already done, and what she wants to do in future around, of course, AI and different applications of AI. Um, Welcome, Elle, to my podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, really, really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. And where are you joining us from?
I live in Exeter, little town in England, so
Okay,
it's sort of southwest, and it's
nice.
night time now. So
That's pretty good. Awesome. So are you ready to jump in for to our today's discussion? I'm pretty thrilled about it.
yeah, me too. I'm good to go. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. All right, so let's start. I know that you are very passionate about helping charity organizations, and also you have some experience in neurodiversity using GenAI. So I want to start with some like basic question.
Yeah.
What kind of AI use cases or applications have you seen that people are doing for social good?
Okay. So when it comes to, I suppose my experience is more around generative AI at the moment, and that's of course hot topic everywhere.
Mm, yeah.
But specifically with AI for charities, I've seen some really great use cases come forward. So, for example, Charity Water, I've seen that they are using image generation to make more, um, more passionate type images to demonstrate what it is that they're doing. And also UNESCO, I think I said that right. They
Mhm,
are using generative AI to translate policy documents, learning material, to make it more accessible for everyone, really. And another application I've seen is, I won't mention the company because they're sort of processing it through, but they are looking to implement sort of semantic search within their documentation. So people that need very sensitive type of support enables
mhm,
them to find that a lot quicker. As you can imagine, if someone's going through quite a traumatic experience, they want to have access to information. If they're going to a
right.
website and can't find what they need, it can become
Mm,
very it just makes it a lot less of a helpful experience. So I'm looking forward to that project coming to
mm,
life and seeing how
nice.
that goes, and I'll certainly talk about it as it does.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, there's some examples there that I've seen, and there's so much potential, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment. But
mhm.
yeah, it's just such a great space to be in.
I totally agree. And actually, that gives me the good segue to ask more questions around like the possibilities of using AI in charity organizations. So, like, my first question around it is like, what are the challenges that you have seen in charity organizations? Like, is it specific to any kind of charity or just like in general?
I think we're seeing pretty much exactly the same types of challenges that we're seeing across the world in many
Mm,
organizations, really.
mhm,
If we think about the types of problems that are being solved, it's very
mhm,
similar. So any
mhm,
sort of organization has their value chain, and for specifically with charities, what they're looking to do is provide a service or
mhm,
support to their community, to their users. But quite uniquely, what they need to also do is generate revenue through donations and sponsorships and things like that.
mhm,
So if you think about what happens under the hood of all of that in the organization, there's so
mhm.
many workflows that are very similar to any organization. Um,
Cool.
so, for example, we've got knowledge workers who are perhaps working in the HR department. They're looking after employees and volunteers. And then you've got the people that are generating the income. It's kind of um, they need to be able to communicate with their donors and sponsors and generate a lot of value quite quickly.
Mhm,
Um, but the challenges are, like I say, very similar to any organization with a knowledge worker is um, you've got people that are very overloaded with information and
mhm,
what generative AI helps them with is distill that information and help them to bring value to their end user to help achieve their objectives and goals. um, yeah, so that's kind of like the challenges that I see within charities generally, which is quite
Okay.
similar to
Right. So
organizations.
basically what I understand is like there's a lot of chaos or like information is spread all over and AI is basically helping it organize it. Is that how I
Absolutely, yeah,
interpret? Nice,
yeah.
nice. It's a good use case. It's a refreshing use case of AI. I'd say that it's helping manage the chaos in the information domain. So, have you seen any large scale applications in this particular sector?
I've seen one charity which is actually supporting charities called Charity Excellence. So
Hmm.
they provide a platform for charity organisations, and they provide free AI tools for them to do stuff like bid writing. There's also
Mm,
a chat on there that helps them find policy templates, for example, if they need like a good starting point. They even offer the service of being able to input your own personal information into those charity bids, and then it will generate a good starting letter. And just
mhm,
like with anything that you produce with AI, of course, it's with generative AI, it's very much that first draft. And I
mhm.
think it's very important to say that with charity organizations and any organization that's implementing, it's having that, using it as that first draft to give you that starting point. It takes away that um, the point of having to put something down on paper to begin with, that blank sheet,
Mhm.
and it just helps you to generate, and you are the one who is making that decision about what ends up in that policy, for example. It's,
Right,
you
right,
don't just plug it in, off you go, and then you can send it. The human is so important. And I think that's especially true with charity organizations. These people that work in these organizations are doing it for a reason. They're
right.
passionate about what they're doing, um,
Hmm.
and they can offer that empathy, that human touch, and
Right.
that subject domain knowledge. So to just put it into context, I guess it's thinking of this AI as an assistant, as a
Assistant, yeah.
hand, as someone to work with,
Hmm.
and to help guide you through things, and produce better quality outputs a lot faster.
I totally agree. I think without the human touch, I don't think these application, especially in such a sensitive sector like charity organizations, I don't think people can go without that human touch. It's you said it absolutely right. Like use AI as an assistant for these things. That makes sense. And when it comes to like people or anything related to human data, or even like, of course, generative AI, these kind of models and everything, bias seems to be a problem anywhere. So,
Yeah.
like, do you see any such issue in using AI to like streamline or manage these charity organizations?
When it comes to bias within charity organisations, and it's true for any organisation, it's very
Hmm.
parallel. Um,
Right.
but with charity organisations, I've seen a very good use case from Cancer Research UK, where they have implemented research guidelines for integrity. So
Hmm.
they've produced an infographic that helps guide their researchers into best practices when doing
Hmm.
their research with generative AI. So,
Hmm.
thinking about things like keeping very good records, keep traceability of what decisions have been made. Um, and then, of course, it's thinking specifically about the bias. It's being aware of, firstly, what is meant by bias.
Mm. Oh,
So
yeah.
having your organisation well trained and well versed on what to look out for, and then as that foundation is built, it's then realizing, okay, how do I introduce bias into my questions and my responses? So
Hmm.
inputs inherently have um, a bias that will guide the output to a certain response. So you're
Hmm.
not getting that dynamic viewpoint because perhaps you've asked for something very specific with your personal bias in that prompt. So that's
Right,
one.
right, right.
The next consideration is, of course, the output.
Hmm.
It's reviewing that and taking a step back and thinking, is this the whole story? So using your knowledge that you've been learned, that you've been trained on about bias and what to look for, and being
Hmm.
that human in that moment to be making that decision. Okay, yeah, I think that's given me a good overview, or actually, that's not what I was looking for. Um,
Right, right.
yeah, with bias, it's all about education and understanding.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah. I am like in my thesis, I'm working with a lot of like, different definitions of bias. So I totally see your point that if you're not educated about bias, then how are you going to detect it, or how can you even understand it? That totally makes sense. So that's good. Like I learned a lot about, like, I have not seen any applications to, or companies doing more like AI in charity organizations. So it's really good to learn from you. And moving to the next part of this conversation is talking about the neurodivergent area, which I know you have worked on quite a bit. So, like, could you maybe tell us, our audience and myself, in one line, like, what is neurodiversity? And, like, yeah, let's start with that first.
Yeah, I think neurodiversity is the acknowledgement that everyone's brain works differently. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just thinking, we don't all fit into a mold. We don't all
Right.
have, the same way of working. And I think it's that
Mm-hmm.
viewpoint of then going, okay, well, what are the different types, and what are the people's needs within those different types as well? So,
Mm-hmm.
we all have neurodiversity because we all have different ways of thinking.
Fair enough.
But when we go down to the different types of brains, that's where we start to kind of segment individuals. So I like that segmentation in a way because it helps the person who is, if we think about the term for when you're segmented, it's saying if you have ADHD or maybe autism or dyslexia, then it's being called neurodivergent. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, I'm a neurodivergent individual. Um, with ADHD. But what that means for me is I can now understand a lot more about the way my brain thinks because I have that association. So I can think, okay,
Right.
where where these challenges that I'm having day to day, which of these things can I have control over? And
Mm-hmm.
which of these things are just inherent of my brain? So
Right.
therefore, I need to think, okay, there's some acceptance there of the way that my brain works in certain
Mm-hmm.
situations, and I need to adapt the way that I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but on the other side of it as well, I think it helps other people who work with me because they might think, okay, well, I know that Ellie potentially could struggle in this area because it's not like typically where her brain would focus very well. But then also realizing where I do focus on, where I can
Mm-hmm.
bring value. And I think
Right.
that's what I love is understanding those challenges that individuals have,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that, be like, yep, that doesn't fit into a neurotypical world, um,
Right.
and and adapting. And I think that's where generative AI can come in around
Mm-hmm.
having that individuals having an understanding of their own challenges,
Mm-hmm.
others having better understanding of those individual challenges as well,
Mm-hmm.
and helping us to communicate better and celebrate that neurodiversity which is within us all. So I think it's going to help us move forward with a better understanding
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully help people to feel a lot more empowered that
I
they
think
are
so.
able
Yeah.
to overcome these.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of my thought on neurodiversity and
Nice.
everything.
That's really good. I'd love to know more about, like, how you are using AI to help mitigate such challenges or enhance, like, the current practices there already are for handling neurodiversity, ADHD, or anything relevant to that.
Yeah, definitely. So I specifically talk about ADHD because that's my experience, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the challenges I experienced before I realised that have ADHD, an ADHD brain,
Mm-hmm.
was I would struggle with quite a few things. Like I was doing and still am doing my level 7 apprenticeship in AI and
Okay.
data science. And for me, I was changing the way I was working to a more structured routine
Mm-hmm.
way of working. I had to achieve certain things in a certain way, in a certain way of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about, prior to that, when I was learning data science and AI, it was all through my self exploration and my curiosity. So I would have a topic and I would literally dive into it and be like absolutely absorbed with it, building a project and really, getting interested. And then when you do a course, it's very much about covering a lot of what you already know, but
Mm-hmm.
then filling it with like this new information and filling those gaps, so which is amazing. But there's parts where you have to work in a certain way and learn in a certain way and be very hold your attention for a long time. And I
Mm-hmm.
really struggled with that, especially when it was topics that I felt comfortable with. It was quite
Mm-hmm.
tricky to remain focused and concentrate. And what that meant for me is it can appear in a way that I would become physically exhausted.
Oh.
If if I was meant to sit in a 2 hour kind of learning learning
Hmm.
video, which is live, and be present and be,
Oh.
I'd find it very difficult to stay focused. So I'd have to come up with some ways of staying focused. So for example, what I did, it was quite in the early days of ChatGPT, is if there was a topic that came up that I didn't really know or I didn't quite understand, I would type it in ChatGPT and just have a conversation about it a bit more and investigate it more, because
Hmm.
then it helped me to learn in my way a little bit more whilst I was still kind of present. But it just meant that I could expand my thinking and not have to think of it in one rigid way. Like if I couldn't learn in that way, the way it was being taught, for my brain, I just turned it into a way that I could. So I'd ask
Right.
questions like, dumb this down for me, or give it to me in an analogy, or give me an example. Those are kind of things that help me learn. Um, so yeah, that's how I started using it, and then realizing, okay, these challenges um, are quite, I'm struggling quite a lot here. And so I
Hmm.
kind of went on the pathway of understanding why. So that's how I came to where I am now. But then through that, I was thinking, there's so much hope in the generative AI. There's so much enablement for someone who is struggling with trying to work in a certain way. And I can see that for such a long time, and even across the world, so many people are really struggling.
Hmm.
And what this can offer is that bit of hope and bit of light that you can fit into a typical world still with your unique brain, and you can still make an impact and focus on things that are important and give you meaning and purpose and value, ultimately increasing your well-being, of course.
Yeah.
But yes.
I'm going to use that code of yours. There's so much hope through AI. I absolutely love it. I'm digging that. And I like how you think about it, because I know like all over the globe, like people have this different ideas about AI. And
Mm,
I'm also somebody who's passionate in this industry. And I feel like I'm totally on board with you that there's so much hope if used it right, I think.
absolutely, if used
Yeah,
right.
if
Yeah.
used right. So, speaking of, around the globe and how people interpret AI, and of course, its potential is varied. We just discussed that. But however, most commonly, people are afraid that it will hamper the jobs or take over the humanity, to exaggerate a little bit. So, I personally believe that if the technology is used appropriately with regulations in place, this technology is here to enhance the human experience. I think you'd probably agree with this opinion, but I want to understand from your perspective, how can AI act as an enabler? I know you shared a little bit, but I'd love to see if you can share some tips with the audience that help change that mindset of those who may not be aware of the good things AI can do for us.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And the first thing I'd say is I empathize with that completely, because I think with anything new and uncertain, it can bring quite a bit of fear and anxiety.
Hmm.
Um, but I think one thing that helps with fear is building your knowledge and understanding. So I'd say getting hands on with the tool and realizing that it's not coming to life or anything like that, and understanding that it is a predictive model at the heart
Hmm.
of it is just kind of helping to distill that fear a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I think Aidan Gomez of Cohere put it very well recently. Something I've it helped to kind of think of it in a different way. Is
Hmm.
Industrial Revolution helped take the load off our backs, and
Right.
generative AI is taking the overload of our cognitive thinking. So it's helping.
Wow.
Um, yeah, isn't it? That whole
Nice.
thing is, that really puts it into a nutshell. And I think thinking of it in that way enables us to pivot our understanding of what's possible and what it can do for us for good. So if you think about, as someone who has experienced quite a lot of stress in my work before, probably because of my condition, but
Hmm.
having overload of information, overload of tasks, stress is huge. It's a huge thing in the whole world. Everyone experiences it. Um, and if stress is caused by um, an overload of information, overload of tasks, mundane tasks that don't actually, you don't feel bring value and things like that, that can
Mm-hmm.
really make someone quite poorly. So if this is able to lift some of that, help us
Yeah.
just to move forward a little bit, get rid of those things or automate those things that are just people don't really want to do. It's not
Yeah.
what they want to
Yeah.
be doing. So much capacity to bring value. We're just not bringing that value because of all of those tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about lifting that a little bit, bringing us all up there, all of those tasks, not all of them, of course, as many as possible are being augmented and assisted.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that we can now focus on bringing value to our company, bringing value to others, solving these problems that are historically probably not possible to solve unless you had a lot of people and a lot of minds and a lot of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now we can go back to problems um, that have tried to be solved before and
Mm-hmm.
fell short because it was too much for people to actually do and think about, and too much cost, too much resource. So, for example, um, an app that I put together, which is called Neuro Mermaid, is something that wouldn't have happened unless an AI was available. So, for example, it summarizes large amounts of text, so that helps with my ADHD, and then it takes that summary and generates a bit of code which generates a visual of a mind map. So
Okay.
imagine someone like that would never have been if generative AI didn't exist, someone would have to
Mm-hmm.
manually do that. It just
Yeah.
wouldn't happen. So if you imagine that as an example of how we can do something and bring something to someone in a different
Mm-hmm.
way through a button, a click of a button, what else is there? I mean, I've just
Yeah.
come up with one thought, one thing. There's so much possibility, and this is the enablement piece. Is
Mm-hmm.
I if something like that was built and it could go into schools, for example, those children who don't learn in that traditional way, that
Mm-hmm.
typical way, have access to a tool that can help them, like I did in my apprenticeship, that can help them to dissect that information and visualize that information, explore that information in the way that would help them, that would
Mm-hmm.
make it more accessible. And I can see in the future, for example, if you imagine, like we saw, is it Sora that was released
Yeah.
this week?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing capabilities of
Oh, yeah.
generating videos, and
Yep.
so if you imagine, not too far in a distant future,
Mm-hmm.
having a topic that you want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
having all of that information, and you've got this concept in there that you don't quite get, and you might go searching for videos on YouTube. I don't know if you do it, but I find videos that might help explain it in a different way for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can see visuals, I can see
Mm-hmm.
images. If I can then type in, like put in my content, and it
Mm-hmm.
generates a video for me there and then, I can then learn that concept super quick. It's embedded in my brain because I like to think of things visually.
Visually,
And
yeah.
yeah, and it's like just a different way of consuming information and learning and
Mm-hmm.
enabling people to learn complex topics
Mm-hmm.
um, with a lot less effort. And no one's had to make that video for me. I've just, popped it in, as you say. Um, so it's like having access to these tools just enable us to go that little step further without
Right.
having to have all that stress of finding information. Because one use case you mentioned about use cases is, for me, I've been using GitHub Copilot and I use ChatGPT to help me code and things like that. Um, and disclaimer, no one should put their own code into those tools, of course. But it helps ideate how to solve a problem, how to work for a problem, and then generate the code, for example. For me, having access to that, my workflow before used to be, I would find an article that would solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it was like a code article. I don't even go on them anymore because I don't need to. It was so long ago. But then I would save that article because
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to go back to it, um, because it's repetitive. And it just felt so stressful because I would just be stopped in my flow, just to find that one line of code that's going to help me do one certain thing. So what it enabled me to do was just say, this is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you code. And of course, you're checking that code, you're making sure it works, you're still
Yeah,
in the loop,
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
but it just gives you that extra step. And I didn't, I didn't know how to build applications. My experience with coding was purely through my data science work.
Mm.
So when it became readily available to use these tools, I was then able to build applications like that I could deploy and give people access to my creativity and my thinking and things that could help them. I would never have been able to do that just like over a year and a half ago. There's no way. In my brain, I'd
Yeah,
be like, I wouldn't even know where to start. Um,
right.
so yeah, I think that really sort of hopefully helps you to see the enablement piece there of
Exactly.
there's something you want to do.
Yeah.
This is the hope piece. You
Mhm.
can go out and get it.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
honestly,
And
like, it's just so accessible and yeah,
I totally
world's
agree.
choice.
And yeah, no, I think yours and my thought actually just match in that enablement piece, especially because so last but not the least, like I know from you got started a year and a half ago. So just if you wanted to give like one advice to all those people who are still thinking or who are still concerned like where to start, especially with, there are too many tools now that do so many like either overlapping things like the very common things that they do, but then there are some things that they do differently than the others. So like how or what would the piece of advice be that you'd give anybody who wants to start or who's confused where to start?
Yeah, I would say one tool that I feel is very helpful is it's quite a small step over because if you use Microsoft Bing, for example, the search engine,
Mm-hmm.
um, you can ask your question there, and what they now have is their Bing chat feature. So you'll get your results, but on the side you'll notice that there's a chatbot responding.
Mm-hmm.
So you not only have your traditional way, so you can feel comfortable in your where you are, there's also the Bing chat just on the side, which will give you a natural response linked to the sources. So you can kind of have that gradual move over. If you like what you see there and you feel comfortable with it, then if you next to the search is a little button that says Copilot, click on that, you're
Mm-hmm.
in, and
Nice.
therefore you're able to kind of transition quite nicely.
Mm-hmm.
That chatbot can actually generate images, it can generate text. I would say just explore it. Think
Right.
about some problems that you, or something you tried to do recently that took you forever to do
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
manually, and see if you can do it in there and see what it feels like. Because you might find that I know there was one use case in my company, someone had said that they had done some competitive analysis very manually, very,
Mm-hmm.
looking through lots of different websites, trying to understand the best companies. And in our session that we had, it was an AI awareness session. Um, we gone off and did a little mini hackathon for 15 minutes, came back, and she was like, I can't believe it. It did it like so quickly, and it was better than what I'd done manually. Um,
Nice.
all she'd asked for was, in very simple terms, do a competitive analysis of da, 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 and
Mm-hmm.
provide me with a table, and it did. And she was able to open up it in Excel, validate everything because the links were there. So yeah, I'd say that's a good starting point. Um, and just try and solve some of your own specific problems because it's
That's
very accessible. I think that's
and I
my
think
tip.
even absolutely, and it's like people if they can solve their own problems, I think that's a strong motivator right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. This was a great conversation, Ellie. I learned a lot of things from you, and thank you so much for sharing your experience and how you got started and just, enabling people to believe in AI for good. Yeah, I had wonderful time. Thank you so much
Yeah, me too.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'll
Abs-
speak to you soon.
Yep. Thank you.